Hello, everyone. This is David Adkins, Executive Director and CEO of the Council of State Governments. This past year, CSG has engaged state government leaders and our associates in a Healthy States National Task Force to examine best policy practices on such topics as capacity, preparedness, and resiliency, leveraging innovation, state health systems, return on investment, and interventions to save lives. Well, when we were working through the assignments of topics and people to these task forces many months ago, we couldn't have imagined how important these topics would become in the wake of the current pandemic. Healthcare has always been important to states, particularly on the fiscal front. States now spend 1 out of every 3 of their dollars on Medicaid programs to support healthcare for populations in their states. We also know that there are significant costs as a result of the disproportionate impacts that health outcomes have on communities of color. And in light of the social determinants of health, we also know that there are many more ways to think about being healthy than just healthcare. So today, I'm really excited to have this opportunity to visit with a thought leader and someone whose experience around healthcare issues is going to illuminate our understanding of some of these issues. In particular, I'm excited to have the opportunity in the midst of this pandemic to focus on the race to a vaccine. All of us, as we contemplate getting back to normal, know that the opportunity to truly get back to normal probably isn't going to be possible until there's a reliable treatment or a vaccine for COVID-19. Visiting with us today is Dr. Michelle McMurray Heath. She's a medical doctor and a molecular immunologist by training. She's the new president and CEO of BIO, the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. Previously, she served as Vice President of Global External Innovation and Global Leader for Regulatory Sciences at Johnson & Johnson, where she led a global team of 900 with responsibilities in 150 countries around the globe. Prior to that, Dr. McMurray Heath demonstrated her science policy leadership in government as the Associate Science Director for the Food and Drug Administration Centers for Devices and Radiological Health under Commissioner Peggy Hamburg during the Obama administration. Welcome, Michelle. We're glad to have you with us.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
And coming to BIO, I believe you started in June, is that right?
Yes, it's been quite a jumpstart, but it's been wonderful. The team at BIO and the over 1,000 companies we represent at the Biotechnology Innovation Organization have been very welcoming, even in the midst of this huge Herculean response that our industry is mounting to fight COVID.
Yes, and it has to be a baptism by fire to step into the seat of CEO at BIO at this moment. But in so many ways, you are the face of an organization that people have thought of as the silver lining in all of this. And I know the industry prior to the pandemic was sending messages to the broader public that science matters, that life-saving cures are important, and that in the United States, that's a combination of researchers at public institutions, innovators and entrepreneurs at large and small companies, that when they come together, create the pathways for continued health, for improvements in health, and truly for those life-saving cures that we look forward to and in the progress towards a vaccine. I'd really be interested in maybe getting your ideas that you could share about how has the biotech industry responded to this pandemic, and where do we stand with regards to potential treatments or vaccines?
Well, you know, it's interesting. It's really easy to speak on behalf of an industry that has been so singularly trained on fighting one of the biggest scourges that we can remember in human history. It's incredible to think about all of the big challenges that remain for the world, and almost all of them can be addressed with sound science. But it takes dedication to that science, it takes continued investment in that science, and it takes entrepreneurs like we find in bio who are really focused on not just science for science sake, but turning that science into pragmatic solutions that help patients and help customers. So in the context of COVID, we see this very, very clearly. In a mere 5 months, our companies, we have a tracker at Bio that tracks all of the COVID-based research projects and companies around the globe. And in that short period of time, our companies have mounted over 670 projects really focused at trying to crack the code of COVID. That includes over 135 of which are focused solely on trying to produce a vaccine. So this is incredible. We've never seen this scale of scientific collaboration, of companies working closely with governments, of people pooling their resources and their brain power to try to get to a solution. And it gives us a tremendous number of shots on goal to try to get this right. Because as you mentioned, our economy, our lives, our progress will not get back to normal until we solve this problem.
And really, Bio, through its members, embodies this very decentralized approach to science. And much like the states serve as the laboratories of democracy for innovations in public policy, it's the decentralized nature of the Bio members that really do give you those shots on goal. And people who can think in new and different ways, in an entrepreneurial way, about threading that needle, whether it be a treatment that would reduce symptoms or reduce hospital stays or treat symptoms, or a vaccine. And one of the things that I think is one of those myth busters is for a while now, there's been a consolidation of the big pharma companies. It's almost like in banking. Companies have consolidated and used their capacity to invest in these drug development and discovery, very expensive kinds of processes. But I think a lot of people don't appreciate there's a lot of small companies that are engaged in this that I would guess make up the vast majority of Bio members. And I would just be interested in as you look at it, what are some of the things that the smaller biotech companies are doing to also be engaged in this race for a vaccine?
So you're right. You know, in Bio, 95% of our members are actually small biotech companies, but we run the gamut, everything from very, very small companies to large companies like Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer and Merck. And it's wonderful to see the health of that full ecosystem. I also should mention that we have companies in the food and agriculture space and the energy and environment space as well, all trained on using the science of biotechnology to answer questions. Now, it's not actually just consolidation. What often has been seen in the history of biotechnology is that the small companies are great engines of innovation. They are tackling some of the most difficult, intractable scientific questions. They're using novel approaches and taking huge risk to try to make sure that they answer really difficult questions. And then the large companies have this amazing ability to do those large-scale clinical trials, to get through the requirements of regulators, to deliver those cures to millions of bedsides around the globe. And so it's really a partnership often between the small and the large. But in COVID, it's really quite remarkable. We've seen that of those 670 projects, 50% of them are US-based, 70% of them are happening in small biotech companies. And because of the rapidity of what's going on and the partnerships, the two, at this point, leading vaccine candidates that went into phase 3 clinical trials this week, which is the last step of the clinical trial process, are both involving small biotech companies. So we're seeing the small companies really getting towards the actual clinical finish line as well. So it's a really exciting time for the business model in biotechnology because both small and large companies are having an impact everywhere from the beginning of the ideation process to the end of delivering cures to patients.
And we have to assume that this is a journey that will not end with the first iteration of a vaccine. Much like the polio vaccine that Jonas Salk developed, it was literally life-changing, but there were iterations of that vaccine that either could be shipped more easily or within the development of vaccines, there's iterations of it even after they're discovered that your industry that you represent will continue to innovate around that for efficacy and efficiency and shelf life and all of that. One of the things I wanted to just focus on briefly, based on your experience with the FDA, is some of that notion of sound science. We obviously, at the federal level, our nation is pouring billions of dollars into this race for a cure or race for a vaccine. And there might be some that would say, are all of the safeguards still in place? We have phase 1 trials and phase 2 trials that are essentially to try to determine if an agent shows promise, and then is it toxic or side effects? And then a third phase of that is to put it into the population with a control group and a placebo to see if it's efficacious. As a former leader at the FDA, what should Americans and what should American policymakers know about those safeguards that would allow us to understand at the end of a phase 3 trial, if an agent has been identified as something that is a vaccine that can be used, how much reliability should they think about that process in assuring safety?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. And, FDA has a very tried and true process for having milestones in clinical development. Phase 1, as you note, is really focused on safety. Is this entity, this new molecule, this new approach safe to put into humans? Phase 2, you're really trying to determine dosing and figure out if it's safe and efficacious in a very small number of people. And phase 3 is large scale. So Moderna, who entered their phase 3 vaccine trial this week, is enrolling 30,000 patients in their phase 3 trial. Now, at the end of phase 3, you really hope to know that in the majority of people, this new entity is safe and effective, and you can say that with certainty, and you can talk with some amount of specificity about how effective you expect it to be and the rate of, if any, of side effects that you also expect to see. But you always learn more when a new drug or vaccine is released to the general population. So we will all have to keep our eyes trained on what we learn in this continuous process. I think it's important for people to realize that FDA is not scrimping on their phase 1, 2, and 3 process. They may be speeding things up. They may be working very closely with manufacturers to make sure that this is happening as quickly as possible. But just because everyone is cooperating to make sure that the wheels move smoothly does not mean the wheels are not going, does not mean that we will not have assurances of safety and efficacy at the end of the day. And I think people want to keep their eyes peeled and their ears peeled, especially in state government, to phrases like emergency use authorization. So FDA has the ability in the midst of crises like a pandemic to say in the midst of phase 3 that we're going to allow some limited use of the vaccine for vulnerable populations, for people at extremely high risk, for people who are facing extreme health crises. And that has been done throughout the history of FDA. But that is done in parallel to phase 3. I know this sounds complicated, but hopefully I can make it a little bit clearer. But we're all going to be looking for those phase 3 results to really have those fast assurances. And as you say, we hope to have more than one safe and effective vaccine at the end of the day, not just because it may be easier to administer or may have a different side effect profile, but because we know so much more about biology today than we did when Jonas Salk was developing. And we know that different communities, different ethnic backgrounds, different populations may have different side effect profiles and or vulnerabilities that make one vaccine choice better for them than another. So we really want to have a lot of different tools at our disposal as we're attacking this. Sorry, that was a long answer, but
no.
It's a complicated question.
You did great, but I love the idea of making sure folks understand that there are safeguards. There's some guardrails on this for safety and efficacy, but it's also true that there may be a multitude of tools that are developed that if the profile of a patient with kidney disease is at risk for one of the vaccines, another vaccine that does not show that particular propensity for a side effect that would affect the kidneys. It's really important that we think about this as an all of science response that may have many ways of getting there. And I think one of the things that is really, I would guess that you will confront, your members will confront, and state leaders are confronting with a little different nuance between the two. But we live in a time, particularly with social media being able to elevate every opinion about something to appear to be the truth, where sound science is under attack, and the very nature of public health that requires public trust in public officials is at risk. So we've seen politicalization of wearing masks, for example, which from a public health perspective is an absolute no-brainer. And we hear Dr. Fauci explaining that as a matter of sound science. And yet there are others who bring, they impose other messages on that. We've seen the statistics that say a strangely large number of people in the United States wouldn't trust a vaccine once it's developed. And so whether or not we can obtain herd immunity through immunizations is just a head scratcher. And so I think to the extent that you and others can be missionaries for sound science, your voices and amplifying those voices will become much more important as we work towards allowing people to have that trust that sound science does matter, and it does result in a transparent process that people can trust. But if you've had conversations with your members about this sort of troubling trend and sort of inexplicable reaction to the way that some in the public would view a vaccine once it's developed.
I think you've struck an incredibly important chord. And if there's one thing that keeps me up at night, it's not our ability to make solutions that will stop COVID, but all of the political subterfuge that's taking place around the scientific process. Science is transparent, unlike politics. And what we really need is our political leaders to reinforce the concept that let science take its course, let the peer review process where scientists critically judge each other's work, and they can be merciless in that judgment. Let that peer review process judge whether or not science is successful. It's not about whether a political leader tweets that a therapy is going to work. It's not about questioning our scientific leaders as people and human beings. It's not even about criticizing scientists for changing their views, because you want scientists to adapt to new knowledge. You want them to evolve their point of view on a novel threat as we learn more and more about that threat. That's the definition of a good scientist. And so we really need to reinforce how important it is to stand behind the scientific method that has led us to progress in so many areas over centuries, and not let it fall prey to politics as usual, because that will cost lives. And it's very important for us to be sober when we're thinking about how we're generating scientific solutions to this crisis.
Before this job, I was a vice chancellor at an academic medical center at the University of Kansas, and we celebrated the centennial of the medical school at that time. And to go back into history, at when the 1800s moved into the 1900s, up to that point, while we knew germ theory, frankly, medicine was practiced by sort of anybody who it wasn't that far developed from the leeches. Most of the cures might have mercury or coal dust or opiates. It was sort of the voodoo science that states said, we've got to license doctors. We've got to embrace what we know about science to make medicine a profession that requires expertise that we will rely on. And at the same time, we can go back several generations in politics. And it doesn't take too much to identify the demagogues, the charlatans, whether it be in medicine or politics, that want to play on people's fear, a very potent political force. And what we have to understand is science is not fear-based. It may be um, motivated to address a problem because of that problem's size, but ultimately in science, there is a shared vocabulary around provable truths. And it's my hope that the proven theories of public health and what we know about the development of drugs and drug discovery and drug delivery techniques is that science will serve us well. And so I'm hopeful that public policymakers will embrace that notion that shared data does provide an antiseptic to all of this static that's in social media and elsewhere, but to recognize that that sort of charlatan demagoguing on this usually has a nefarious money interest that somebody wants to prey on people. But you would hope that we would be past that, but it seems like that the urge to that is just too overwhelming. So,
you know, science, unlike politics, learns from the past. You know, if you look over the history of science, it's incredible to think of the progress that we've made. We may look back at leeches as, oh my God, how could anyone think that would work? But we actually learned that it didn't work through the scientific method. We tested it, we saw that it didn't produce the results that was expected, and we moved on. The fact that the polio vaccine took 4 years to get to the point that we are with the COVID vaccines now in a space of 6 months is just a testament to how science builds on itself and keeps getting towards better outcomes and faster progress. And so we just have to stay on that tried and true tested course, and really rise above all of the rest of the mess that's out there.
yeah, absolutely. And outside of the COVID bubble, I had the opportunity to attend several bio meetings. They're huge gatherings of scientists from all over the world. It's fascinating to watch the meetings that were going on in the hallways or in the hotel lobbies, in which scientists and companies, entrepreneurs were coming together, whether it be medical devices, ag companies that were developing new solutions to problems brought on by climate change. It was fascinating to see. And what I was amazed by is how all of the computing power that we now have really provides an opportunity for personalized medicine. This idea that we will be able to tailor interventions specifically to one person's molecular makeup, their genetic makeup. And when you think about that as the future of medicine, you realize that the playing field upon which your members have an opportunity to innovate is unlimited. And to think that our children, even our grandchildren, will have a kind of medicine available to them that right now is in its infancy, but shows such great promise. And that's why I think state policy and economic development around how do we encourage entrepreneurial activities, how do we invest in the basic sciences that, as you said, the basic sciences allows then entrepreneurs to take findings from that and begin to build on it. It's all sort of iterative, it's cumulative. And I'm wondering, how do you see the role of government partnering with your members to help that pipeline of innovation reach patients and reach society in ways that serve the common good?
It's so important, and not just for the fact that scientific progress will speed with that type of nurturing, but because scientific entrepreneurship is one of the greatest economic development tools that we have at our disposal. We're calling it the biorecovery, what we're going to see post-COVID. The more local governments and state governments look to techniques and approaches that stimulate and encourage biological entrepreneurship, the faster their economies will recover. The greater their ability will be to create jobs with wages that really sustain families. And the more solutions they'll have to treat healthcare crises and to take care of our aging population. So this is a win-win-win situation. Bio-based businesses really give so much to the communities in which they grow that it's really one of the best options, I think, for local governments as they look for tools to climb back out of the COVID hole.
And doctor, in the drug space, it's also an international, it's a global engagement. Scientists now have the ability to talk to each other across international boundaries. But as you talked about innovation in the biotech sector really being the precursor to economic recovery in the States, and why investment in that sector makes a great deal of sense. Frankly, I think the effects of the pandemic, the trauma brought on by the pandemic, will have a lot of people thinking about how do we build resiliency into our economy in ways that this kind of trauma can be, we have some walls that prevent it from happening again. I'm interested in your thoughts about some of the molecules that are necessary for U.S. drug development or production often are made somewhere else. And I've wondered if you've seen within your industry either reshoring of making of molecules as sort of a plan B supplier supply chain issue, or if there is enough stability to that supply chain that it hasn't been disrupted by either the effect of the pandemic on any particular country or trade wars or the politics between those countries.
Yeah, now that's a very, very interesting question. In my mind, the internationalization of the scientific biological enterprises has happened for good reasons and bad reasons. The good reason is that the US is the engine of scientific innovation. We really have the ecosystem that produces so many of the solutions. And so we want to export those solutions around the globe because, as we see in the COVID crisis, we're in this together. And we want patients around the globe to benefit from the great ingenuity that we're seeing here in the US. But it's also true that some of that manufacturing capacity has moved to other shores and other countries in an attempt to try to bring down the cost of healthcare, which we also know is important. But it means sometimes that a lot of those great jobs are not necessarily available here in the US. So what we would like to see going forward is a marrying of those approaches, making sure that we keep that international capacity so that we're able to treat patients around the globe, so that we're able to export the goodwill that comes from American science helping international communities, but at the same time restoring our manufacturing capacity here at home so that we're able to, one, have that great bountiful access to jobs, but two, so that we have the resiliency, as you mentioned, and the capacity to meet some of our American healthcare needs here at home. So it's really a combined approach. It's not a question of just offshoring and reshoring. It's not that simple because of our commitment and our responsibility to improve health around the globe. But it does mean that we need to pay more careful attention to to our issues here at home. And we at Bio have been looking at communities around the country about how we start to replicate our biological hubs that have been so successful in communities like Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, for example, where we've been able to build business communities in the biological sciences that have just huge ripple effects in the community. And the good news is the emergence or the growth of information technology means that we may be able to build those hubs in areas that were more difficult to accommodate before. So we really think we can see this replication of economic impact across the country in smaller and smaller communities and in more states.
Yeah, I know firsthand, having been living in Kansas City, but the Kansas City area recognized that its unique strengths were around biotechnology in the ag sector. And so from the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri, through Kansas City to Manhattan, Kansas, where Kansas State University was located. And along that corridor is the University of Kansas and the University of Kansas Medical Center, but across state lines, across municipalities, across institutions of higher learning, they recognized that a focus on economic development, leveraging those assets, would have spin-off effects, and they're high-paying jobs, they're green jobs, and they often spin off entrepreneurial enterprises that then create wealth on their own. So I was talking to someone once, and I said, what's the strategy that would work best at the state level for entrepreneurs? Is it tax breaks? Is it incentives or credits? And this person said, all those things are good, and if you give them to us, we'll take them. But if it were up to me, I would have the governor every week host a group of entrepreneurs from their state to talk to each other. And when you have those synergies, great things are going to come out of them. And so, as you say, smart communities are figuring out what is the node. They may not ever be able to be Boston, but what is the node they could focus on? And it's usually, how do you leverage the talent you have to grow that node into a real center of innovation and expertise. So the seeds of bioscience really are about American exceptionalism, but it's also about the key to great jobs for the future. So.
And it's so important what you say. It's not just about healthcare. In bio, we have so many amazing food and agriculture businesses, as well as industrial and environmental businesses that are working on how do we green supply chains? How do we have biodegradable packaging? How do we cut down on the carbon footprint of all of the different types of industries that we have? And so it's important for states and localities to think about how they can support a variety of these different kinds of areas of bioscience, because they have such potential impact and good that they can do around the globe. We're in the midst of putting together a toolkit of those best practices so that we can share those with local municipalities and let them know what are the concrete steps they can take to bring those kinds of businesses and jobs to their communities.
Well, that's a great course, and that toolkit, I'm sure, will be interesting to policymakers that would look at how can they partner with their entrepreneurs and startup businesses to create incubators, but to also support the growth of those industries. That's really important. And I think one other aspect, it gets really complicated, but is also thinking about the first thing that sparks innovation is talent, and it's the ideas that are generated. And in some cases, states should be very interested in what goes on at the State Department with regards to visas for the best and brightest graduate students to come to the United States to study, often to contribute significantly to basic science and translational research. So the opportunity for talent to move around the globe, the United States is the big winner in that because of the strength of our universities. And from that innovation, we can leverage the best talent on earth really to have the United States benefit from that in so many ways. So we are all interconnected. So last question, because I know people will be interested. Legislative sessions will take place beginning in January. The elections will be in November. But if you had to say, as we think about this race to a vaccine, I'm not asking you to predict when is the first shot going to go into somebody's arm or when is the first pill going to be taken. But what would you, as you look at how science works, how clinical trials proceed, we know that doses are being made of some of these agents at risk now by companies being supported by the federal government. But based on what you know, when would you think sort of the earliest that people could expect a vaccine if these clinical trials that have shown promise were to develop an agent? And I think we always have to be cautious, because this may be something that is reasonable to think we could be living with this for a couple of years, 3 years. But tell us what you think. We ought to go home and tell our families. We had a chance to talk to Dr. McMurray Heath. Here's what she said we should expect.
So, as we look across the industry and we think about recent experience with the clinical trial and development process, our best estimate is that people should expect a vaccine in the spring of 2021. That seems like a painfully long way away, but we have to understand that science doesn't always work. The reason we're doing these trials is because some of the entities under development will fail.
Yeah.
That's the nature of science. And so we have to be prepared for those setbacks, and we have to be prepared for the time it takes to collect the data and analyze the data in a stringent way. So that's what I tell my mother, expect it in the spring of 2021. If we beat that, that would be amazing. But we know it's always a challenging road with science. It's never easy to predict.
Well, I bet your mother's very proud of all you've accomplished in your life, and CSG and all of the state officials we work with are very proud to have Bio as a partner. I've enjoyed our conversation today and look forward to perhaps a year from now doing a little after action report to say what's the next generation that comes out of this pandemic? What's the silver lining that we can continue to look for? Out of disruption comes innovation. There's never been a greater disruption than what we're living through right now. So I have great hope that from lessons learned will come innovations that save lives, prolong life, and enhance the quality of life. And that's what the members of Bio are all about. And we appreciate your leadership there. And if we can ever be of assistance, we hope you'll call on us. For those that visited with us today, I would encourage you to check out the Bio website for those toolkits and other information about what biosciences are doing to be the engine of economic development across the states, as well as provide those kinds of innovations across many sectors. And for those policymakers listening that are interested in digging into our national task force on healthy states, we'd encourage you to visit the CSG website as well. We look forward to continuing the conversations with you as we together seek to make a difference in the states. Stronger states working together mean a stronger nation. And that's what we're all about, to serve the common good. Thanks for joining us today.